Hey y'all, and welcome to Politibrawl. My name is Brian, and Jim Jordan goes on to CNN and blows the lid off of the entire case surrounding Judge Boasberg and the Justice Department for legally deporting illegal migrants. Let's dive in.
Given all these arguments, if you think that this is, and there is an enormous body of law out there, some of it built during the Bush administration, which I know, you were here in Washington during a lot of this, that suggests that the president actually might win this case on the merits in the longer term under the normal process. So if you're the White House, why not put that appeal through? Why not use the process that's available to you right then?
Well, there in fact may be an appeal process. I know we got all kinds of cases. I think 15 different cases now where there have been some federal district judge who's done some kind of injunction, ruled against President Trump in just 8 weeks of him being in office. So those are all going to get challenged. You go through the appellate process. That may in fact happen in this particular case too.
Sure.
All I'm saying is this judge looks different than some of the other things we have seen. And the pace that were 15, I think in the Biden administration, it was like 13 in the entire 4 years. There have been 15 of these in 8 weeks. So again, that's a concern. It's why 2 weeks ago, the Judiciary Committee, we passed legislation which said when a federal district judge in Timbuktu, California issues an injunction, it should only apply to the parties of the case in that respective jurisdiction, not apply nationwide in some of these other cases that we're dealing with. We think that's good. We passed it through the committee. We'll try to look to pass it on the House floor and move it through the process.
Sir, let me ask you about something you said partway through your first answer, which is this question. You are in charge of the House Judiciary Committee. Do you plan to hold hearings that may look at the impeachment of Judge Boasberg or other federal judges?
We're gonna hold hearings on this entire issue. The 15 injunctions that have been done in an 8-week time frame, Judge Boasberg decision. We plan on holding hearings, hearing from experts, talking about this whole kind of body of law, this whole situation. Again, everything is on the table. We're considering all options. That's why we passed legislation. There may be another legislative remedy we want to look at. But we do think it's important for us to gather information, get input on this issue. We're looking maybe even as early as next week having a hearing in one of our subcommittees. We're not ruling out anything. I never do that.
Do you think it'd be politically risky to hold impeachment hearings for judges, considering the incredibly narrow House majority?
Look, I'm not saying we're going to go there. All I'm saying is I think this is a concern. Judge Boasberg has raised concerns with us Republicans on the Judiciary Committee, Republicans in general, over the years. When you go back and look at the whole FISA situation, remember what happened there, where the Comey FBI took a dossier that was paid for by the Clinton campaign, hiring the law firm Perkins Coie, who hired Fusion GPS, who hired a foreigner, Christopher Steele, who wrote this bogus document full of all kinds of falsehoods. The Comey FBI took that document to the FISA court and they got warrants to go spy on the other party's presidential campaign. And Judge Boasberg was a part of letting that happen. And then one of the guys who lied to the court, Kevin Kleinsmith, got a slap on the wrist for actually altering a document in front of that secret court. And now he comes out with this decision, and we're not supposed to look at that? Of course we're going to look at that. You'd be crazy not to. So we're going to look at that, but all options are on the table, legislative and anything else, and that is the approach we're taking as we begin to hear from experts in hearings we plan to have over the next several weeks.
That is an unusual bombshell right there, okay? What Jim Jordan just revealed, that apparently this judge, Judge Boasberg, at the time they had figured out that, there were all these lies regarding the Steele dossier that was then touted by the mainstream media, touted by our own intelligence operations to go after Donald Trump, and it turns out the whole thing was false, and Boasberg was the one that basically did nothing once this thing crossed his plate. So this dude has apparently been embroiled in party politics for a while, which is something that a district court judge should not be involved in whatsoever. So this dude has political baggage. He has a history of not exactly ruling in fairness, and when it comes to using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, this dude, for some reason, decided that at the last minute, with no warning, no written record, with just a verbal order to turn the planes around and come back to the United States, all because of a lawsuit that was done preemptively by the ACLU in an attempt to find a potential issue along the way. In other words, this lawsuit wasn't even legal to begin with because it was a preemptive one. Okay, that's like that's like suing someone because you think that they're going to slander you somewhere. Okay, that is not a good use of a judicial court's time. And then this dude with political baggage just out of the blue says that, hey, you need to turn the planes around. Something smells very fishy about this whole situation. And apparently it gets worse after the fact because once the suit was filed, then Boasberg was also wanting this district court judge, by the way, from Washington, D.C., grew up in D.C., went to school in D.C., probably still doesn't know what mambo sauce is, okay? That's when you know when you're talking to someone who's actually from D.C. versus someone who has lived their entire life just inside the heights of Georgetown. Okay? That's not D.C. Living just outside of the hill, that's not D.C. D.C. is that area on the other side of Rock Creek Park. That's the FedEx field. That's Navy Yard. That's D.C. Okay? So this dude has decided just out of the blue, not only am I going to let this lawsuit pass, even though it has no case yet, I am also going to overstep my bounds and then ask for even more information. I'm going to ask for the flight logs. This is something that Jim Jordan does need to investigate in some form or fashion because good grief, if you can't see judicial overreach here, I don't know where you are ever going to see it. And then to make matters worse for this district court judge, apparently the Trump administration is now calling him out for doing a terrible job. For instance, the court has now spent more time trying to ferret out information about government's flight schedules and relations with foreign countries than it did in investigating the facts before certifying the class action in this case. That observation reflects how upside down this case has become, as digressive micromanagement has outweighed consideration of the case's legal issues. Oh boy, if that's not a shot across the bow from a legal standpoint, again, I don't know what is. Basically, this whole point that the Trump administration's Justice Department is making is that there was no real case to begin with. Then this judge is asking for extra information that doesn't technically pertain to the case, so this judge can figure out whether indeed the Trump administration was complying with his orders. That is a judge not just overstepping his bounds, that's a judge telling everyone else what you can and can't do when you are still arguably working inside of the law. This lawsuit that is brought up has apparently no real standing, but this judge let it pass anyways. So yeah, Jim Jordan is going to be looking into this dude. Impeachment is indeed on the table. It's probably not going to happen because that requires 67 senators. There's going to be at least 14 Democrats who are going to stay on the Democrat side. There's not a chance of this flipping. This dude isn't going to get impeached. He might get reprimanded by the House and probably deserves it at this point. At the very least, an investigation needs to be looked into by a third party, not by the Justice Department, definitely not by the Supreme Court, at least not yet, but by the Congress. And that way we can see for the entire American people to hear without going to an actual court of law and look at what the facts are in this case and look and see if this judge by the name of Boasberg, by the way, has indeed overstepped his bounds. I think he has. I think this is something that isn't grounds for impeachment, but it is something that Congress needs to bring up right into law to make it easier for us to look into these judges who are acting outside of their bounds and then doing something about that. We need to start having a conversation about what our Justice Department, sorry, not our Justice Department. I was about to say Supreme Court, but that's not exactly right either. We need to start looking at the way that we start appointing these judges and start looking at it from a completely different perspective. Because currently what we're seeing is a cataclysmic set of chaotic rulings that don't really have anything to do with this judge's purview. So this is a legal problem that's getting worse and worse the more that I look at it. But y'all let me know what you think is going to happen down in the comments below. My name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed this segment here on Politibrawl. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. Until then, y'all have a good one.